Over the last couple of years, I have had conversations with new auto sales associates who failed to mention the requirement of a break in procedure. One insisted that no break in was needed for modern vehicles. In addition, more than one did not know that running the gas tank too low could result in an overheated fuel pump, primarily because most fuel pumps are cooled by the fuel itself. It seems that dealerships like to keep very little fuel in their vehicles' gas tanks. So before going for a test drive or taking your new vehicle home, try to look at the actual owner's manual or one that you may be able to find online for that specific vehicle. But today, I'd like to talk about breaking in your new vehicle and start off by saying that many owners believe that this is totally unnecessary. I have read many comments on car forums saying that they drove their sports cars, in particular, straight to a racetrack after leaving the dealership. Their assumption is that engines are broken in at the factory. As you will see in at least two of the video clips here, this assumption is false. Let's dive in and see what other YouTubers think.
8 parts per million, huge change. We also see the iron go from 13 parts per million down to 8. We also saw the aluminum go from 13 parts per million down to 4. So that means those cylinders, those pistons, everything is breaking in. So I guarantee you the next sample, it won't be that much different than this one, because that engine was breaking in during that first 500 miles or so. So just like my Porsche engine, we saw those wear metals go down early and then stabilize. So there it is. It's the science that just showed the engine wasn't broken in at the factory, because if the engine was already broken in, the wear rate would have been level. But the wear rate was not level. Dramatically so, not level.
But they do take a little bit of time to break in, and the breaking in is simply providing the clearance to make sure that oil film always stays intact. So a crankshaft is this machined, it's got machined surfaces, the crank board, and the bearings are machined, and they have their running surfaces, but they take a little while to bed in. And you want to remove the high spots, the polishing with some light load, varying the engine speed and load, so all those little high spots are knocked down and polished, so you have a really good layer of bearing on the crankshaft, and that break-in process provides really consistent clearance between the bearing and the crankshaft, so that under high speed, high load, high temperature, you never worry about breaking down that film. But all bearings and all new machine parts, they do have a little bit of disparities in them, and it takes a little while for that stuff to knock down and move around. The magic with the bearings, and the bearing suppliers will tell you this, they have all these, their secret recipes with a top layer that's pretty much malleable. It's not as malleable as lead, but it also does absorb any contaminants, any debris that may be in the build, be in the engine, be in the oil, as well as move around based on the engine's load and the polishing and the break-in, so that what they call it an adapt. So the bearing adapts, it moves and provides clearance where there needs to be clearance. And that's the whole break-in process. So what the bearing manufacturers really look for is they want varying speed, varying load, and they want to give a lot of time for the bearing to cool off, because a hot bearing, as it's trying to break in, can sometimes scuff. So they like the varying load and not going too high speed, too high load for the first 500 miles. And we found that for most street driving, you can do a 0 to 60, you can do a couple of watts, but you're not able to put as much speed and load like you can on a racetrack that really gets the temperatures up there and keeps things consistently hot and consistently loaded.
Now, you may be somebody that doesn't have a high performance application, but a lot of these same ideas are there for things like a Toyota Camry or a Kia Telluride. In some of the mainstream cars, you want to take it off the showroom floor and you want to safely get that thing up to temperature before you start ragging on it. You don't want to just let it sit there and idle for 5 to 10 hours at a time, and you don't want to drive it on the highway at just a constant speed. You want to try to bring the engine up, you want to try to get some revolutions in the engine, get up to speed, bring it back down. Again, trying to cycle through to get some of that even wear built up for the first 200 miles. Even if you can't do that, try to do it for the first 100 or 200 miles, and you typically are good.
Honored to speak with someone who worked in FCA's Performance Engine Division. They actually have their own land speed record car where they took a 2-liter out of a Dodge Neon SRT4 and boosted that up to, I believe, 800 horsepower. They had an absurd amount of boost in it. And they were telling me their braking procedure for that engine with 800 horsepower. And once again, it was varying the load and it was changing the RPM, but not going too high. I believe the highest he went was 4,000 RPM. And I asked him, you work in this world, you have access to this data, is there any advantage of a hard break-in? And he said, absolutely not. There's no advantage to it. It's just a risk. And so it's an unnecessary risk. You can do a lighter break-in. Obviously, don't baby the vehicle. Give it, decent throttle. Give it half throttle, something like that. But you don't want to floor it because you can run into that risk of causing damage if you get things in there too hot where these imperfections lie. You want to wear them down more gradually rather than quickly. Now, yes, manufacturing tolerances have greatly improved and it's always getting better, but this doesn't necessarily eliminate the need for a break-in period. Typically what it just means is that the break-in periods will be shorter than they previously were as a result of better manufacturing tolerances. Okay, so we have points 1 and 2, don't floor it, don't bring it up to red line. And our third, we're going to be talking about don't use cruise control. And really the reason why you don't want to use cruise control is because you want to vary that engine RPM as you're driving. And when you set cruise control, you're just going to have one set engine RPM, especially with manual transmission vehicles, which obviously aren't going to shift for you. But basically you don't want to use cruise control because you don't want to keep it at a constant speed. You want to vary the engine's load and you want to vary the engine's speed so that it gets used to all these varying conditions and it properly wears it in. So, you can take that into consideration and think, maybe you shouldn't do a 1,000-mile road trip as the first trip in your car because you're probably just going to be sitting on the highway at one.
This one is also an important one, and that is to do with a braking period. I plan to do a whole separate video on this, but for now what you need to know is not to drive too harshly or too excessively during the first 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers. Just take it easy on the car itself, and then maybe even let it idle for a bit when you're turning off the engine, even if it doesn't have a turbocharged system, that's okay. Just basically you want to take it easy on engine and then also try to drive different speed. Go and drive on the highway, go drive in the city, and do a mixed driving, but don't try to drive on the same speed for a long time during that period. So you don't want to go to a highway and drive for 700 miles, for example, during the first little while. Because you want the engine to use different speeds, different mixture of usage, and that will allow the engine to wear out most evenly. So keep that in mind, first 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers.
Oh, if you're not a first owner, you don't know what happened to these cars in their first and most important part of their life. You're in the dark. It's always a gamble.